I rented the cabin in November of 2018 because I was worn down in a way sleep never fixed. I had been working construction in Spokane, 6 days a week, long shifts, cold mornings, constant noise. I wanted silence more than comfort. I searched for something cheap, remote, and empty. The listing said off-grid hunting cabin on private logging land in northern Idaho. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, no cell service. It sounded honest and plain. The photos showed a small wood cabin with a metal stove and a loft. Nothing fancy. That was what I wanted. I drove east before sunrise and crossed into Idaho while the sky was still gray. The paved road ended sooner than I expected. After that, it was dirt and mud, deep ruts, puddles frozen thin on top. My truck slid more than once. Old tire tracks ran off in different directions, some filled with leaves, some sharp, like they had been made recently. The trees were thick and tall, mostly pine, blocking out light even during the day. There were no signs, no fences, no gates, just forest and a rough path cutting through it. The road narrowed until it felt like I was driving through a tunnel of branches. I wondered if I was in the wrong place. Then the cabin appeared ahead, set back from the road, half hidden by trees. It looked smaller than the photos. The logs were dark with age. The roof sagged slightly on one side. Smoke stains marked the stovepipe hole, but there was no pipe attached. The place did not look abandoned, but it did not look ready either. When I opened the door, the smell hit me first. Old wood, cold ash, and something sour under it. The floor was swept clean, but not recently. Dust lay in the corners. A small table stood against the wall. A single chair. A rack with a few hooks held an empty coat hanger. Near the door sat a pair of boots. They were leather, worn down, size smaller than mine. I stopped and stared at them longer than I should have. They were placed neatly, toes facing the wall. On the wall above the table hung a calendar. It was still turned to October, but the year was the one before. Several dates were marked with pencil. Short lines. No words, just marks. I touched the page and felt the paper give. It was not new. It had been there through at least one winter. The listing had not mentioned personal items. I told myself the owner must have left things behind. Maybe it was a shared hunting cabin. Maybe the photos were old. I needed the break. I unpacked my bag and set my food on the table. I stacked firewood by the stove and cleaned out the ash pan. The place warmed up slowly. The silence pressed in once the fire settled. No road noise, no wind, just the crack of wood and the soft sound of trees moving far away. By late afternoon, the light faded fast. November up there did not give much time. I stepped outside to take a look around before dark. The ground was covered in wet leaves and pine needles. No snow yet, but frost hugged the shadows. Behind the cabin, the land sloped down toward a draw. I noticed a faint path through the brush, pressed flat, not an animal trail. It was too wide and too even. It ran toward the trees and vanished. That night, I ate canned food and sat by the stove until my eyes felt heavy. The cabin had no curtains. The windows were small and cloudy. I could see nothing beyond the glass once dark fell. I climbed into the loft and lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the fire settle and pop below me. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound outside. It was not a step. It was the sound of weight shifting in leaves, slow and careful, like someone adjusting their stance. It moved along the wall, then stopped. I held my breath without thinking. The sound stopped too. My heart hammered so hard it felt loud in my ears. After a long pause, the sound started again, a few feet farther along, then stopped when I inhaled. I lay there stiff, counting seconds, listening to my own breath. The smell crept in through the cracks around the door. Wet fur and metal. Not rust, not blood, something sharp and animal. I told myself it was a deer, maybe an elk. But deer did not stop when you breathed. They bolted or snorted or ran. The sound circled the cabin once. Slow, deliberate. It never rushed. It never scraped. It stayed close to the walls. When it reached the door, it paused longer. I could feel the cold seep in, as if the air itself leaned closer. I did not sleep after that. Near dawn, The sounds faded into the forest. The smell went with them. When light finally crept through the windows, I climbed down and checked the door. It was still locked. The latch was intact. Outside, I found marks on the cabin wall. Deep vertical lines along the logs, close together, running from waist height down to the ground. They were not claw marks. They were too straight and too wide. It looked like something heavy had been dragged along the side, scraping against the wood. Leaves beneath were pushed aside, pressed into the mud. I walked the perimeter slowly. Around the back, the marks grew deeper. The ground there was torn up. Not footprints, drag marks. Something had been pulled along over and over as if testing the wall. Near the corner, I found a patch of dark hair stuck to a splinter. It was coarse and long, not from a deer, not from any animal I hunted. The path I had seen the day before was clearer now. Fresh leaves were pressed flat. The trail led downhill and disappeared into thicker brush. I did not follow it. I packed my bag instead. Before I left, I checked the boots by the door again. Mud clung to the soles now. Wet mud. I knew they had been clean when I arrived. I felt a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with the cold. I drove out before noon, sliding through the same ruts, watching the trees in my mirrors. When I reached cell service, I pulled over and checked the listing. It was gone. No history, no message thread, no record of it at all. I tried the number I had used to book it. It was disconnected. Weeks later, after the tension finally eased, I looked into the area. The logging land had been shut down for years. No permits, no rentals. I found a short local news note from the year before about a man cited for living illegally in a hunting cabin on private land. He had been removed. The cabin had been posted as uninhabitable. No name was given. No follow-up. I realized then what I had walked into. Someone had never left. The boots were his. The calendar was his. The path was his routine. He had been circling the cabin because it had always been his, and he needed to know if I was staying. He stopped when I stopped because he was listening, measuring whether I was prey or a problem. I never reported it. I never went back. I still work construction, still get tired, but I do not look for silence like that anymore. Silence in places like that belongs to someone else, and sometimes they are still there, waiting for you to breathe. Summer 2009 sits clear in my head because it was the last time I trusted quiet places. My uncle had owned a stretch of land that had been in the family longer than any of us could remember. When he died, the paperwork landed on us. He had no kids. The cabin went to the three of us by default. We were cousins, close in age, close enough to split a weekend without tension. None of us had been there since we were teenagers. We talked about clearing it out, seeing if the land was worth selling, maybe keeping it as a place to come back to. Felt simple. The drive took longer than expected. The access road was barely a road anymore. Grass grew through the center. Branches scraped the sides of the truck. The air changed as we climbed, drier and sharper, with a smell of pine and old dust. When the trees opened, the cabin sat alone in a wide clearing. Too wide. The treeline stood back as if pushed away years ago and never allowed to creep back. The ground around the cabin was hard-packed dirt. No undergrowth, no fallen limbs. It looked maintained without looking used. The cabin itself was smaller than I remembered. One room, a loft, a short porch. The wood had gone gray but not rotten. The windows were intact. No boards, no broken glass. The door opened without resistance. Inside, the air was stale but not sour. No mold, no animal smell. Dust coated everything in a fine layer, even undisturbed. What stood out was the order. Tools hung in straight lines. A hammer centered on its nail. A handsaw clean. Chairs pushed under the table with care. Dishes stacked. A broom leaned in the same corner I remembered from childhood. For a place that had sat empty for years, there were no signs of intrusion. No nests, no droppings, no chew marks. The floorboards were intact, not warped. The trapdoor to the crawlspace was sealed with screws. The cabin felt paused, not abandoned. We unloaded our bags and started cleaning. Dust moved in slow clouds. Sunlight cut through the windows and stopped halfway across the floor. The silence pressed in once we stopped moving. No birds close by, no insects. The clearing felt like a bowl. That night, after dark settled fully, we sat at the table with lantern light. The walls creaked as wood cooled. Then we felt it, not heard, felt pressure from below. A slow shift, like a heavy body rolling from one side to the other under the floor. The boards did not rattle. They bowed slightly. It was deliberate weight, not scratching, not running. It moved once, then stopped. We stayed still. Our breathing sounded loud. Minutes passed. It happened again, closer to the center of the room. I told myself it was an animal under the cabin. Something large, maybe a bear passing through. But the crawlspace was sealed. The screws were old, not recently touched. The movement did not have the pattern of an animal exploring. It felt like someone adjusting their stance. Sleep came in pieces. Every sound dragged me awake. The cabin held the night noise instead of letting it pass through. Morning light showed nothing out of place. The floor looked the same. No marks, no broken boards. We went outside and walked the clearing. Near the tree line, half hidden by brush, we found the trap. It was not rusted. The metal was dark, oiled. The springs were strong. It was set and wired to a thick chain anchored to a buried stake. It was sized for something tall and heavy, not a fox trap, not for small game. The ground around it was clean. No leaves caught in it. No sign it had been there long. None of us admitted to setting it. We all knew we hadn't. The trap felt like a message, not a tool. We disabled it and moved it away from the cabin, closer to the trees, and left it open on the ground. The rest of the day felt stretched. We packed boxes, sorted papers, carried old furniture to the porch. The clearing stayed quiet. Too quiet. No wind through the trees. No distant engine. Late in the afternoon, I noticed shallow depressions in the dirt near the cabin wall. Not tracks, more like compressed spots where weight had rested. They lined the wall under the windows, evenly spaced. That night, the sound returned, started under the floor again, then shifted. A dull knock came from the wall behind the table. Not a tap, a slow, spaced pressure, as if something leaned into the wood from the other side. The sound traveled one section to the next, following the interior framing. It did not circle the cabin. It moved in straight lines. The fear that set in was not panic. It was recognition. Someone knew the structure. Someone knew where to press. We did not sleep. At first light, we packed fast. The cabin felt smaller, closer. When I carried the last box out, I noticed the crawlspace screws were gone. Not loosened, gone. The trapdoor hung slightly open, just enough to see darkness beneath. We left without locking the door. Weeks later, after we reported the land to the county and pushed for an inspection, the explanation came together piece by piece. A man had been living beneath the cabin for years. He had known my uncle. He had worked the land with him decades earlier. When my uncle grew sick, the man stayed, taking shelter under the cabin, keeping it clean, setting traps farther out to avoid attention. He moved at night. He avoided the clearing during the day. The pressure we felt was him shifting under the floor, careful not to be heard. The knocking was his way of checking if the cabin was empty before moving inside to use the tools and water. The trap was for deer. The size was wrong because it was old and modified. The county found evidence of a dugout space under the cabin, reinforced with scrap wood, dry and organized. He had left the night we did. The land sold. The cabin was torn down. The clearing filled back in over time. I still think about how quiet it was, how careful order can hide presence, and how weight can move under you without ever being seen. I booked the cabin because I did not want people. The divorce had emptied my apartment in ways furniture could not fix. Silence felt like something I needed to earn back. I searched for places that were cheap, remote, and plain. No hot tubs, no views worth sharing. The listing was simple. An old cabin near an unused trail, owned by a retired park worker. Seasonal rental. No neighbors close by. That was enough. The drive took me farther off pavement than I expected. The last stretch was gravel pressed into dirt, narrow enough that branches brushed both sides of the car. The trailhead sign I passed was sun-faded and half-tipped over. The word closed had been painted on it years ago and left to peel. The cabin sat beyond it, set back from the road. Not hidden but not inviting either. The trees stood close, but the space around the cabin was bare, like it had been swept clean over time. The cabin smelled like old paper and smoke as soon as I opened the door. Not fresh smoke, the kind that lives in wood after years of burning. The air was dry and still. One room, a small kitchen area, a table near the window, a narrow bed pushed against the wall. The floorboards were worn smooth. Every sound I made carried. Near the window, several handwritten notes were tacked into the wall. They were yellowed and curled at the corners, held by different nails, placed over many years. Some were lists, some were dates with short lines under them. Many were sketches of the tree line, drawn from the same angle with small changes marked in the margins. A few mentioned weather patterns, wind direction, first frost, late snow. Others mentioned sounds at night, footsteps, movement, pauses, times written down to the minute. I assumed they were from decades ago, habits of someone who had spent too long alone watching the same patch of woods. I unpacked slowly. I liked how little I had brought. Food for a week, few books, a notebook. I turned my phone off and left it in the car. The quiet pressed in but did not feel heavy yet. The first night, I slept poorly, but I blamed the unfamiliar bed and the shape of the silence. Around the same time I had been waking back home, I heard it. Footsteps on the trail. Slow steps, even spacing, not rushed, not cautious. They moved down the unused trail toward the cabin and stopped short. Not at the door, not close enough to hear breathing, just near enough to know someone was there. I lay still and listened. The steps did not move again. No shifting, no retreat. The night sounds continued around it. Distant insects, a branch creaking somewhere deeper in the trees. Whatever had walked down the trail stayed where it was until morning. When light came, the space outside felt empty again. The second night, it happened at the same time. The steps followed the same pattern, same pace, same stopping point. I checked the window, staying low, and saw nothing. The trail itself was barely visible from that angle, a darker line through lighter ground. I told myself it was an animal following a habit. Deer move the same paths. People like patterns, but animals do too. I spent the days walking the area around the cabin, never far. The unused trail ran straight for a short distance, then curved out of sight. It was overgrown but not reclaimed. The ground was firm, pressed down by years of use. No fresh tracks, no trash, no signs of recent camping. The cabin felt like a place people used to pass through and then forgot. The notes on the wall started to bother me once I read more of them. The handwriting changed over time, but the focus stayed the same. Sound at night, time, distance. Some notes mentioned standing. Some mentioned waiting. None mentioned fear. They read like records, not warnings. On the third night, the steps came again. Same time, same rhythm. I stayed awake before they started, waiting. When they stopped, I felt the weight of being watched without seeing anything. Not watched closely, not hunted, just observed. The steps did not come closer. That was the part that unsettled me most. Whatever it was did not test the space. It already knew where to stop. By the fourth night, I knew the timing without checking a clock. I sat at the table with the light off and listened as the steps approached. I noticed how consistent they were. The spacing did not change for uneven ground. There was no hesitation. When they stopped, the night seemed to pull tight around that point on the trail. On my last day, I followed the trail. I told myself it was curiosity. Felt more like obligation. About 50 yards in, the ground changed. The dirt was packed down into a rough oval shape, wider than a single footprint, longer than a stride. No clear prints, just pressure. The kind that comes from standing in the same place for a long time, over and over. The surrounding brush was bent slightly outward, as if someone had leaned there many times. I stood in the center of it and faced the cabin. From that spot, the cabin window was visible through a break in the trees. Not enough to see inside clearly. Enough to know when a light was on. Enough to see movement. Back in the cabin, I finally opened the notebook I had left on the table the first day. I had been using it to write down thoughts I did not want to carry back home. I flipped past my own pages and found older writing at the back. Notes from the retired park worker. He had used the notebook when he stayed there before renting it out. He wrote about checking the cabin each night, about standing at the edge of the trail to make sure renters were inside and settled, about stopping at the same spot so as not to disturb them, about listening for signs of trouble. He had done it for years, even after the trail was closed, even after he stopped working for the park. It was habit. It was purpose. He stopped writing about it the year before I booked the cabin. A final note mentioned his knees giving out and the walk becoming too much. The sounds at night in the notes on the wall matched the times he wrote about. The sketches of the tree line showed the view from that oval of packed dirt. The steps had not come the last night. The pattern had ended because I was there alone long enough to notice it. I left the notebook on the table when I packed. I did not take it with me. It did not feel like mine to carry. I drove away in daylight and did not look back at the trailhead sign. I understood then that isolation does not mean absence. Sometimes it just means routines that outlast the people who made them. December 2014 stays sharp because the cold felt personal. We drove into the Colorado backcountry with the kind of confidence that comes from a clear forecast and a borrowed cabin. A friend's coworker owned it and used it during hunting season. The place sat off a rough spur road, far enough that you felt removed but close enough to believe help was possible if something went wrong. We were supposed to stay 3 nights. 4 of us. A simple winter trip before the holidays. The drive-in was quiet. Snow lined the road but had not yet closed it in. The cabin appeared through the trees late in the afternoon. A low structure with a shallow roof and a small porch buried halfway up the steps. It looked solid. Thick logs. A stone chimney. The kind of place built to last through bad weather. Inside, it smelled like old wood, fuel, and cold metal. The generator sat in a shed out back, already half buried in drifted snow. We stocked the cabin, checked the radio, and marked the weather window on a printed forecast we had brought with us. The storm rolled in faster than predicted. By evening, the wind picked up and the snow came down thick and heavy. Not flakes but clumps that slapped against the windows and piled up in minutes. Visibility dropped to nothing. The world outside became white noise. We stayed inside, rationing fuel, listening to the wind scrape across the roof. The cabin creaked but held. Felt sealed like a bunker. Around midnight, the generator failed. Not a sputter, just a clean stop. The lights went out and the silence rushed in. We sat in the dark for a few seconds before the cold started to move closer. We grabbed headlamps and checked the breaker, then the shed. The generator was dead. Fuel line frozen. The wind made it impossible to work on it safely. That was when we noticed the door. The front door was not wide open. It was unlatched, resting against the frame. Cold air pushed in slow and steady. There was no snow inside the threshold. No drift, no scatter. Just clean wood and a thin line of frost creeping inward. The smell came with the air. Damp earth. Not the clean smell of snow. Something deeper, like soil turned over. We closed the door and locked it. The latch clicked into place. We stood there longer than needed, listening. The storm swallowed everything beyond the walls. The cabin felt smaller without power. The corners darker, the cold more present. When the wind eased enough to check outside, we opened the door again. Snow had already filled in around the porch. The tracks started a few feet away from the steps, as if whoever made them had approached from the side. They were wrong. The strides were long, uneven in depth, pressed deep in places and shallow in others. Not human in any way I recognized. No boot pattern, no clear claw marks. Too narrow for a bear, too wide for a deer. They circled the cabin twice, following the wall, then stopped at the window on the east side. The window was fogged from the inside, but a clear patch near the center showed where warmth had met glass. The tracks ended there. No sign of departure. No overlap where snow fell back in. It looked like whatever made them had stood there for a while and then vanished. We did not go far from the door. The storm returned in waves, pushing us back inside. We sealed the cabin as best we could and layered up. The radio crackled but gave no clear signal. The cold settled into the floorboards and climbed. That night, the cabin shifted. It was not a sound at first. It was a feeling like weight pressing against one wall. The logs gave a low groan, deeper than the wind. The structure moved slightly, not a shake but a lean, as if something heavy had rested against it to test the balance. It happened once, then again, each time slow and deliberate. The window near the tracks rattled in its frame. Snow slid from the roof in a soft rush. The pressure stopped and the cabin settled back into place. The cold felt sharper after, like the walls had thinned. We stayed awake until the light changed. The storm eased near dawn, the wind dropping to a low hiss. When daylight came, it showed a world erased. Snow covered everything in smooth layers, filling in the tracks from the night before. The truck was buried to the mirrors. The road was gone. We dug out by hand. Took hours. The cold burned through gloves and soaked into sleeves. No one spoke. We worked in shifts, clearing snow, packing it down, clearing again. When the truck finally moved, it felt like pulling free from something that wanted us to stay. We drove out slow and careful, following faint markers back to the main road. The storm closed behind us, hiding the cabin from view. None of us talk about that trip anymore, but I did not let it sit without answers. Months later, I asked the coworker about the cabin. He hesitated, then explained. During hunting season, he shared the land with others who did not always follow rules. Poachers used the storms to move, knowing tracks would be erased by morning. Some wore improvised snow gear, wide frames strapped to boots, uneven and deep in fresh snow. They moved fast and stopped where they could see warmth, where they could judge if a place was occupied. The door had been tested during a lull in the storm, opened just enough to check for people, closed again before snow could blow in. The smell came from wet clothing and earth tracked from the woods. The pressure against the wall was someone bracing themselves against the logs, listening through the structure, feeling for movement inside. The cabin was solid, but it was known. Known enough to be checked in bad weather. Known enough that someone felt comfortable circling it in the dark. The explanation fit the facts in a way fear never had. It did not make the memory softer. It made it heavier. The idea that someone had been that close, patient and practiced, using the storm as cover, settled into me deeper than any story about the unknown. We were lucky. The storm forced distance. Daylight forced retreat. If the generator had not failed, if the lights had stayed on, the night might have gone differently. I still think about the way the cabin shifted, the careful wait, the testing lean. Not a threat, an assessment. That is what makes it hard to forget. I took the job because I needed money and I was running out of excuses. It was a simple caretaker gig listed on a local board. 1 month alone. Check on a seasonal cabin while the owner was overseas. Make sure nothing broke, nothing froze, nothing walked off. The pay was fair and the instructions were short. I told myself I could handle quiet. The cabin sat at the edge of a long gravel drive that cut through mixed forest. Pines close to the road, older hardwoods farther back. The place looked modest from the outside. One story, weathered siding, small porch. It did not look like it could hide much. That turned out to be wrong. Inside, the cabin felt older than it looked. Not in a charming way, in a layered way. Walls that had been added, then added again. Door frames that did not line up square. Floors that dipped in places and rose in others. The air smelled like dry wood and old insulation. There was no single layout. Rooms led into narrow passages. Closets opened into shallow crawl spaces that stopped abruptly or bent around corners. The owner had left a short note on the table with the keys. Most of it was basic. Generator schedule, where the shutoff valves were. One line stood out. There was a locked room at the back of the cabin. I was told not to open it. No reason given. I assumed it was storage. People like to keep private things private. The first few days passed quietly. I followed the routine, checked the exterior, walked the property line, made sure nothing had fallen or broken. At night, the cabin settled and shifted the way old buildings do. Wood popped, pipes clicked. I slept lightly but without fear. The sounds started on the fourth night. Not loud, not sudden. A soft movement inside the walls. Not scratching, not chewing. Something sliding along a path. I sat up in bed and listened. The sound moved from the far end of the cabin toward the middle, then stopped. It did not cross into the section I was in. After a pause, it moved again farther away, following the same route back. I told myself it was an animal in the walls. Mice can be careful. Raccoons can be heavy. But the sound had weight and control. It did not rush. It did not explore. It followed a line like it had done it before. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same path, same pauses. I stood in the hallway with a flashlight and listened as the sound moved on the other side of the wall. Always one room ahead, always keeping distance. When I stepped forward, it stopped. When I stepped back, it continued. I started mapping the sound. I walked the cabin during the day and traced where it went at night. It moved through sections of the structure that were boxed in by later additions. Spaces that were not meant to be lived in. Narrow channels between walls. Dead air gaps where insulation had sagged or been replaced. The locked room sat at the end of that route. Every night, the sound stopped there longer than anywhere else. I did not try to open the door. The lock was old but solid. The frame around it was newer than the rest of the wall, as if it had been reinforced. The floor in front of it was clean, swept more recently than other areas. I slept less. When I did sleep, it was shallow and broken. I kept lights on in the room I stayed in. The sounds never crossed into that space. They stayed to the other side, like there was an agreement I did not understand. One morning, I woke to find mud tracked across the kitchen floor. The prints started near the back door and ended at the hallway that led toward the locked room. They were bare footprints, but wrong. The toes were too long. The ball of the foot was stretched, pressed wide as if the person walked flat and heavy. The heel barely touched in some prints, like the weight favored the front of the foot. I stood there for a long time before cleaning them. The mud was fresh, dark and wet. The ground outside was frozen that morning, thin ice over dirt. I checked the door. It was locked. No damage. No sign of forced entry. I cleaned the floor slowly, wiping each print away. I did not take pictures. I did not want proof. I wanted the marks gone. After that, the sounds changed slightly. They came earlier. They paused longer. Sometimes they reversed direction halfway through the route, as if reacting to where I was sitting. I tested it. I moved chairs. I changed rooms. The sounds adjusted. I stopped using parts of the cabin. I confined myself to the main room and the bedroom. The rest felt like borrowed space. On the 10th night, I heard movement above me, inside the ceiling cavity. It followed the same pattern as before, just higher. When it reached the section above the locked room, it stayed there for a long time. Long enough that my neck hurt from listening. The explanation came together slowly, not in a rush of fear but in pieces that fit too well. The cabin had been added onto over decades. Some spaces were sealed. Others were not. Someone small, flexible, and familiar with the layout could move through them without entering the living areas. Someone who knew when to avoid me. I searched public records during the day when the sun was up. The land had changed hands several times. Before the current owner, it belonged to a man who had lived off-grid for years. He had been cited once for unauthorized structures. Nothing more. No follow-up. I left 3 days early. I packed quickly and did not clean more than necessary. I did not check the locked room. I did not walk the perimeter one last time. I drove away in daylight and did not stop until I reached pavement. The owner never asked why I left early. He paid me in full without comment. Weeks later, I saw a local notice about trespassing arrests near seasonal properties. One man, thin, barefoot when found, living between walls and crawl spaces of abandoned cabins. He had been doing it for years, moving when owners returned, avoiding contact, leaving no damage. I understood then why the sounds avoided me, why they followed a route, why the room was locked. The cabin was not empty when I arrived. It was shared. I had just been the one who noticed. I borrowed the cabin because it was offered with a pause. That pause mattered to me later. At the time, I heard it and ignored it. I needed a place to get away for a few days. My friend said his family still owned a cabin by the river. He said he had not been there in years. He did not explain why. He handed me the key like it was something that had weight. The cabin sat close to water. Too close. A slow river ran past it, wide and brown, moving steady without noise unless something broke the surface. There was no dock, no stones laid down, just a muddy bank that sloped into the water and stayed soft even in dry weather. The trees leaned toward the river, their roots exposed like ribs. The cabin looked plain from a distance. One story, low roof, weathered boards. When I got closer, I noticed details that felt added over time. Extra latches on the windows, screwed in by hand, not matching. Some were newer than others. The bedroom door had a lock on the outside. Not a privacy lock. A solid one, the kind meant to hold a door shut from the hall. The frame around it was reinforced. Inside, the air smelled damp, like river mud and old fabric. The floors were worn smooth, darker near the door. There were hooks on the walls that had been used often, though nothing hung from them now. The furniture was sparse and pushed back from the windows. I walked the perimeter before dark. The riverbank showed signs of use. Footprints that had sunk deep and then blurred as water crept back in. Drag marks where something had been pulled up and then returned to the water. I told myself it was fishing gear. People leave messes. The first night was quiet until late. I sat with a lamp on and read. When I turned the light off, the cabin dropped into darkness fast. The river made a low sound, more felt than heard. Sometime after midnight, I heard splashing. Soft, careful, not the sound of someone crossing fast. It moved along the bank, close enough that I could hear water displaced and then settle again. I turned the light on. The sound stopped at once. Not faded. Stopped. The river went back to its steady movement. I stood by the window and waited. Nothing happened. When I turned the light off again, the splashing returned after a few minutes, farther down the bank, moving away. The second night followed the same pattern. Movement along the river. Light on. Silence. Light off. Movement again. I tried leaving the light off and listening. The splashing came closer, then stopped on its own, as if whoever was there had reached a point they did not want to pass. During the day, I checked the windows. The latches were not decorative. They were placed where someone could reach them from outside if the window was open. The bedroom door lock made more sense in daylight. If someone were sleeping inside, that door could be secured from the hall to keep them from opening it. It was not meant to trap someone. It was meant to hold them still. On the third night, the contact happened. I was awake and sitting on the bed when I felt it. Not a knock, not a push. Something touched the side of the cabin and stayed there. The wood made a faint sound under pressure. Then a slow drag, lengthwise along the boards. Whatever touched it had weight and control. It was not an animal brushing past. It was deliberate contact, like someone steadying themselves or checking the surface. The touch moved along the wall and stopped near the window. I did not turn the light on right away. I listened. I could hear breathing, faint and controlled, mixed with the river air. When I turned the light on, the sound withdrew, slow at first, then gone. I did not sleep after that. Morning showed marks on the lower boards, smeared with wet mud. Hand-shaped, but stretched by water and pressure. Fingers longer than mine would be spread wide. The mud matched the riverbank. I left early. I locked everything the way I found it. When I returned the key, my friend looked at me for a long moment and then asked if anything came up from the water. He did not need an answer. He had already seen it before. Later, he explained without drama. Years back, a man had been living along that stretch of river, moving with it, sleeping in culverts and brush, fishing and scavenging. He used the cabin when it was empty. He preferred it dark. He learned the light patterns. The locks were added after a family member surprised him inside. The bedroom door was meant to keep someone safe while help was called. The man was eventually removed by authorities, but the river kept its paths. Others passed through. Some stayed longer than they should. The cabin remained a place people checked from the water, a solid thing in the dark. I understood then why the hesitation mattered. The cabin was not haunted. It was known, and being known in a place like that was worse.